You have come again. For nights now. For fires. And the story, like the steppe itself, stretches on, patient and vast and full of things yet to be revealed. I am glad you are here. Truly. A story told to the empty air is just noise. A story told to a listener, even a drowsy one, even one whose eyes are heavy and whose breathing is slow, that is something sacred. That is how the old knowledge survives. Carried from voice to ear, from fire to fire, from one night to the next, across the centuries. So sit. Rest. The fire is good tonight, steady and warm, and I have fed it with dry birch that burns clean and slow. The wind is gentle, barely a whisper, and the stars above us are scattered across the sky like seeds thrown by a careless hand. We have traveled far together, you and I. We have watched a boy born with a blood clot in his fist on the banks of the Onon River. We have seen him lose his father to poison, lose his clan to abandonment, lose his freedom to the Kang of the Taichi. We have watched him kill his half-brother on a hillside. We have seen him rescue his wife from the Merkits, build his first alliances, and suffer defeat at the hands of his blood brother Jamukha at the Battle of Dalan Balt's hut. And we have watched him rise. Slowly. Quietly. One person at a time. One kept promise at a time. Like grass returning after fire. Tonight the story turns. Tonight the boy becomes something more. Tonight the scattered pieces begin to fall into place, and the shape of what Temujin is building becomes visible, the way a mountain becomes visible when the clouds lift, and you realize it has been there all along, enormous and immovable, waiting to be seen. Tonight I will tell you about betrayal. About the fall of kings. About the end of a friendship that began with knucklebones beside a river. And about the moment when a man who had nothing became the ruler of everything. To understand what happens next, you must remember Torul, the Khan of the Karate. The man who had taken Temujin under his protection after the young man offered him Bort's sable coat. The man who had pledged warriors for the rescue of Bort from the Merkits. The man who called Temujin son and who, in the complicated web of steppe politics, served as Temujin's most powerful patron. The relationship between Temujin and Torul was deep and layered, built on the old Anda bond between Torul and Temujin's father Yesugei, and reinforced over years of mutual support. Temujin had fought for Torul, had helped him regain his throne when rivals tried to depose him, had been, in many ways, the most loyal ally the old Khan possessed. But Torul was aging. His mind was still sharp, but the fears that come with age were growing. He had a son, Sengum, who was ambitious and insecure and deeply jealous of the growing influence of this young Borjigin upstart who his father seemed to favor over his own blood. Sengum whispered in his father's ear. He was not alone. Others in the Karate court, men who had watched Temujin's following grow with alarm, added their voices. They said, "This man is becoming too powerful. He does not serve you. He uses you. One day he will no longer need you, and on that day, he will turn on you the way he turned on everyone who has stood in his path." These words were poison. A different kind of poison from the one that had killed Yesugei, slower and more subtle, but just as deadly. And Torul, the old Khan who had once embraced Temujin as a son, began to listen. The trust between them, which had been the foundation of Temujin's rise, began to crack. Not visibly. Not loudly. But in the small ways that matter. Invitations to council meetings that did not come. Messages that were delayed. A coldness in the voice that had once been warm. Temujin noticed. He always noticed. He had spent his entire life reading the faces and voices of men for signs of danger, and he could feel the shift the way a horse feels a change in the weather, through the skin, through the bones, through some instinct too deep for words. Temujin tried to repair the relationship. He proposed a marriage alliance, asking that his son Jochi be married to one of Torul's daughters. It was a reasonable offer. A traditional way of binding two families together. A gesture of good faith that said, "I am not your enemy. I want our families to be one." Sengum refused. He rejected the proposal with contempt, calling Temujin's family unworthy. It was a public humiliation, and on the steppe, a public humiliation was not something that faded with time. It hardened. It became part of the record. It told the world that the Karait considered the Borjigin beneath them. The rejection stung. But what came next was worse. Sengum and his allies hatched a plan. They would invite Temujin to a feast, a celebration of the proposed marriage alliance, as if they had changed their minds, as if the rejection had been a misunderstanding. And at the feast, they would seize him. Some accounts say they planned to kill him. Others say they planned to capture him and neutralize him as a political force. The intent does not matter as much as the method. They planned to use hospitality as a weapon. They planned to lure him in with food and friendship and then destroy him. It was exactly what the Tartars had done to Yesugei. But this time, the plot was betrayed. Two herders in Torul's camp, men of no particular importance, men whose names would have been lost to history if not for what they did next, learned of the plan. And they rode through the night to warn Temujin. Why? Why would two common men risk their lives to warn a man who was not their leader, not their chieftain, not their kin? The histories do not explain their motives. But I think I know. I think they had heard the stories about Temujin. About the man who treated common herders as the equals of princes. About the leader who ate last and fought first and kept his promises. And I think they looked at the world they lived in, a world where men like them were invisible, where their names meant nothing and their lives could be spent by their betters without a second thought, and they decided that Temujin's world was worth saving. Two nameless herders. The hinges on which history turned. Temujin received the warning and acted immediately. He did not panic. He did not rage. He gathered his closest followers and he retreated, quickly and quietly, putting distance between himself and the Karait before Sengum realized the trap had been sprung on empty air. But retreat was not surrender. Temujin had learned long ago that retreating and surrendering were entirely different things. A retreat is a tactical decision. A choice to survive today so that you can fight tomorrow. A surrender is the end. And Temujin did not know how to end. He sent messages to his allies, to his followers scattered across the steppe, to men who owed him debts of loyalty, men he had helped, men he had promoted, men who had sworn oaths to him around campfires in the years of rebuilding. The messages were simple. The time has come. Ride to me. And they came. From every direction, across the grasslands, through the river valleys, over the mountain passes. They came on horseback, armed and ready, because they had been waiting for this moment, some of them for years. Waiting for the call that would turn them from a scattered collection of loyal individuals into an army. The war with the Karait was not a single battle. It was a campaign, fought across weeks and months, across the rolling grasslands of central Mongolia. There were skirmishes. There were retreats. There were moments when Temujin's forces were outnumbered and moments when the tide turned. But the decisive battle came at a place the histories call the Battle of Kalakaljid Sands, and later, the final confrontation at the Jur Valley. The details of the fighting are less important than the outcome, and the outcome was this. The Karait were defeated. Torul, the old Khan who had once called Temujin's son, fled into the western steppe with a handful of followers. He was killed by Nayman border guards who did not recognize him. A pathetic end for a man who had once been one of the most powerful leaders on the steppe. He died alone, far from his people, his son's jealousy having cost him everything. Temujin mourned him. Genuinely. He honored Torul's memory and treated the old Khan's remains with respect. Because Temujin understood something that Sengum never did. That Torul had not been his enemy. Torul had been a good man, a decent man, who had been poisoned by the whispers of those around him. The real enemy was the system that allowed frightened men to undermine bonds of loyalty with nothing more than words spoken in the dark. With the Karait absorbed into his growing nation, Temujin turned his attention west. To the Naymans. The Naymans were the last great independent power on the Mongolian steppe. They controlled the western territories, wealthy grasslands that stretched toward the Altai Mountains. They were numerous, well-armed, and led by a man named Tian Khan, who looked at Temujin's rising power with the same fear and contempt that every established ruler feels toward the upstart who threatens to upend the old order. And riding with the Naymans, having fled there after the collapse of his own coalition, was Jamukha. Jamukha. The blood brother. The Anda. The brilliant, charismatic, tragic figure who had been Temujin's mirror image and his opposite in equal measure. Jamukha had thrown his lot in with the Naymans, offering his knowledge of Temujin's tactics, his understanding of the man's mind, his insight into the weaknesses that only a former friend could know. It was, in a way, the final alignment. Everyone who opposed Temujin, everyone who clung to the old ways, everyone who feared the new world he was building, they were all gathered in one place, under one banner, for one last stand. The irony was not lost on anyone. The man who had once shared Temujin's blanket was now advising his enemies. The man who had exchanged knucklebones with him beside a river was now plotting his destruction. The steppe had a cruel sense of symmetry. Temujin marched west. Let the fire settle now. We are approaching the great battle, and I want you to be comfortable. Pull the blanket higher. Let the warmth enfold you. The battle will not hurt you. You are safe here, by the fire, and the fighting is 900 years away and 1,000 miles distant, and it cannot reach you. It can only be heard, faintly, like thunder on the horizon, rumbling and then fading, into the endless quiet of the steppe. The battle against the Naymans took place in the summer, when the grass was high and the days were long and the sun stayed in the sky until late in the evening, painting the steppe in shades of gold and amber. Temujin's army was smaller than the Nayman force, but it was unified in a way that no army on the steppe had ever been unified before. Every man knew his place. Every unit of 10, of 100, of 1,000, moved as one, responding to signals, following orders, functioning like the fingers of a single hand. This was the system that Temujin had built during the quiet years. The decimal organization. The Arban, the Zun, the Minghan. Men from different clans, different tribes, different backgrounds, welded together by shared training and shared purpose and shared loyalty to a leader who had earned their devotion through years of fairness and kept promises. The Naymans had numbers. Temujin had cohesion. And on the battlefield, cohesion almost always wins. The histories describe the battle in fragments. A night march to surprise the Nayman positions. The use of decoys, extra campfires lit across the hillsides to make Temujin's army appear larger than it was. The steady, methodical pressure of disciplined cavalry against a larger but less organized force. Taiang Khan, the Nayman leader, was not a warrior. He was an administrator, a man of courts and councils, who had inherited his position rather than earning it. When the fighting began in earnest, he wavered. His generals urged him to stand fast. His advisers urged him to retreat. He did neither, and in the paralysis of indecision, his army crumbled around him. The Naymans broke. Not all at once, but in stages, the way a dam breaks, first a trickle, then a crack, then a rush that cannot be stopped. Taiang Khan was killed, or captured and killed shortly after. His forces scattered to the winds. And just like that, the last great independent power on the Mongolian steppe was gone. But where was Jamukha? In the chaos of the Nayman defeat, Jamukha slipped away. He had always been clever, always a survivor, and when the battle turned against the Naymans, he did not stay to share their fate. He rode into the mountains with a handful of followers, disappearing into the wild country where the steppe gives way to forest and the forests give way to stone. He was a fugitive now. The last free man on a steppe that was rapidly becoming one nation under one ruler. Every tribe that had opposed Temujin was defeated, absorbed, or destroyed. Every rival claimant was dead or in hiding. Only Jamukha remained, out there in the mountains, with nothing but his wits and his pride and the memory of what he had once been. For a time, Temujin did not pursue him. Perhaps he hoped Jamukha would come in willingly. Perhaps he was busy consolidating his conquests, integrating the Nayman and Karait peoples into his growing nation. Perhaps he simply did not want to be the one who gave the order. Because giving that order would mean acknowledging that the bond was truly broken, that the knucklebones exchanged by the river meant nothing, that the boy he had loved and the man he had fought were the same person and that person had to be dealt with. But the steppe does not allow loose ends. A fugitive leader, even a defeated one, is a rallying point for the discontented. A symbol for the old ways. A name that men could whisper around fires when they thought no one was listening. As long as Jamukha was free, the unification was incomplete. The end came not through battle but through betrayal. Jamukha's own followers, the handful of men who had fled with him into the mountains, turned on him. They seized him and brought him to Temujin, hoping to be rewarded for delivering his greatest rival. They were wrong about the reward. Temujin looked at the men who had betrayed Jamukha, and he did something that shocked them. He ordered their execution. All of them. Every man who had laid hands on their own leader was put to death. His reasoning was simple and terrible and absolutely consistent with the code he had lived by his entire life. A man who betrays his own leader cannot be trusted. If they would betray Jamukha, they would betray anyone. And in the world Temujin was building, loyalty was the foundation of everything. Betray that foundation, and nothing else matters. Not cleverness. Not ambition. Not the gift of a captured enemy delivered in chains. He killed them for being disloyal. And in doing so, he sent a message to every person in his growing nation. Loyalty is sacred. It is more sacred than victory. It is more sacred than convenience. It is more sacred than survival itself. If you follow a man, you follow him to the end, even if the end is defeat, even if the end is death. And if you betray him, no reward will save you. This was not mercy. This was not cruelty. This was the architecture of an empire. Every brick laid precisely, every principle enforced without exception, every action a lesson to the millions who were watching. And then Temujin turned to Jamukha. The two men faced each other. Former friends. Former blood brothers. Former enemies. Two boys who had grown into men along different paths and now stood at the end of the only road that was ever possible. The histories tell us that they spoke. That Temujin offered Jamukha his life. That he said, "We were Anda once. We can be Anda again. Ride with me. Let us be brothers as we were before, and let the past be the past." I do not know if this offer was sincere. Perhaps it was. Perhaps, in that moment, facing the man who had been the other half of his youth, Temujin genuinely wished for a different ending. Or perhaps it was a gesture. A performance for the watching court, a display of magnanimity that would enhance his legend without risking anything, because he knew what Jamukha's answer would be. Jamukha refused. His words, as recorded in the secret history of the Mongols, are among the most haunting in all of Mongolian literature. He said that just as there is room for only one sun in the sky, there is room for only one ruler on the steppe. He said that he had been Temujin's rival, and a rival cannot become a servant, not truly, not in his heart. He said that if he lived, he would be a thorn in Temujin's side, a shadow of doubt, a reminder of the road not taken. And the road not taken is a dangerous thing for a ruler to contemplate. He asked for death. But he asked for it in a specific way. He asked to be killed without the spilling of blood. This was important in Mongol belief. To die with your blood upon the ground was to have your spirit trapped, earthbound, unable to rise to the eternal blue sky. To die without blood, by breaking of the back or by suffocation or by being wrapped in felt and crushed, was to die with your spirit intact, free to ascend. Jamukha was asking Temujin for one last kindness. The kindness of a clean death. A noble death. A death that honored what they had been to each other, even as it ended what they had become. Temujin granted it. Jamukha was killed without the spilling of blood. The exact method varies by account. Some say he was wrapped in a carpet and trampled. Others say his back was broken. The details matter less than the meaning. Temujin honored his blood brother's final wish. He gave him the death that Mongol tradition considered dignified. And then he mourned. The histories say that Temujin wept. I believe it. I believe that in that moment, the conqueror, the man of iron will and cold patience, the man who had killed his own half-brother without flinching, wept for the friend he had lost. Not the enemy. The friend. The boy with the knuckle bones. The young man who had ridden beside him under the open sky when the world was new and anything seemed possible. Because that is what loss is. It is not the absence of the person as they are. It is the absence of the person as they were. It is the death of the past, which is the only place where the people we loved still exist as we remember them. With Jamukha gone, there was no one left to challenge Temujin. The steppe, which had been a chaos of competing tribes and feuding clans for as long as anyone could remember, was quiet. Not the quiet of peace, not yet, but the quiet of a world holding its breath, waiting to see what would come next. Temujin spent the months that followed doing what he had always done best. Organizing. Building. Integrating. The defeated tribes, the Karate, the Naimans, the Tartars, the Merkits, the Taichi-Yud, all of them were absorbed into his system. Their warriors were distributed among the Arbans and Zuns and Minghans, mixed deliberately with men from other tribes, so that the old loyalties of clan and blood would dissolve and be replaced by new loyalties of unit and nation. Their leaders, those who submitted willingly were given positions of responsibility. Those who had fought honorably were respected. Those who had betrayed their own chiefs, as Jamukha's followers had learned, were punished. The rules were clear. The system was fair. And fairness, on a steppe that had known nothing but the arbitrary exercise of power by whoever happened to be strongest, was revolutionary. Women were given protections they had never had before. Temujin, who had watched his mother be stolen and his wife be kidnapped, who understood the vulnerability of women in a world of raiders and warriors, established laws against the kidnapping of women. He outlawed the sale of women into marriage against their will. He made it a crime to abuse a captured woman. These laws were not born from modern sensibilities. Temujin was a man of his time, and his time was brutal by any standard. But he was also a man shaped by his experiences, and his experiences had taught him that the casual cruelty toward women that the steppe accepted as normal was not just wrong, it was wasteful. It created enemies unnecessarily. It bred resentment. It weakened the fabric of the society he was trying to build. And so, one law at a time, one reform at a time, one act of deliberate, calculated fairness at a time, Temujin built something that the world had never seen before. A nation forged not from a single tribe or a single bloodline, but from dozens of tribes, welded together by a shared system of laws and a shared belief that loyalty and merit mattered more than birth. Let me tell you about the laws, because they are remarkable, and because they are the kind of thing that settles gently into the mind, the way snow settles on the steppe, quietly and without fanfare, covering everything. Temujin established what would become known as the Yosa, the great law code of the Mongol Empire. It was not written down at first. On the steppe, law was oral, carried in the memories of wise men and recited at gatherings and passed from generation to generation by voice alone. But its principles were clear, and they were enforced with an iron consistency that was, in itself, a kind of revolution. Theft was punished severely. If you stole a horse, you returned 9 horses, or you paid with your life. This may sound harsh, but consider what a horse meant on the steppe. A horse was survival. To steal a man's horse was to threaten his life and the lives of his family. The severity of the punishment matched the severity of the crime. Hospitality was sacred. A traveler who came to your fire must be fed and sheltered, regardless of tribe or clan or personal history. This was the old custom of the steppe, but Temujin codified it, made it law, backed it with the authority of the state rather than leaving it to individual conscience. Religious tolerance was absolute. This is perhaps the most surprising of Temujin's laws, and the most visionary. The Mongols themselves practiced a form of shamanism, worshipping the eternal blue sky and the spirits of the land. But Temujin's empire would eventually encompass Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Taoists, and followers of a dozen other faiths. And his law was simple. All religions are permitted. All priests and holy men are exempt from taxation. No one is persecuted for their beliefs. This was not idealism. This was pragmatism. Temujin understood that an empire built on dozens of conquered peoples could not survive if it tried to impose a single faith. Religious wars would tear it apart from within. Better to let every man worship as he chose, and to bind the empire together not through shared belief in a god but through shared obedience to a law. It is remarkable. In the 12th century, while Europe was fighting the Crusades and the Islamic world was fragmenting along sectarian lines, a man on the Mongolian steppe established a policy of complete religious freedom that would not be matched in the West for another 600 years. Trade was protected. Temujin understood, perhaps more clearly than any ruler of his era, that trade was the lifeblood of empire. Goods flowing along secure routes enriched everyone. Bandits and raiders who disrupted trade impoverished everyone. And so he established a system of protected trade routes, guarded by his warriors, where merchants could travel in safety. The stories from this period are almost unbelievable. Merchants would later say that a virgin carrying a sack of gold could walk from one end of the Mongol Empire to the other without being molested. This was an exaggeration, of course. But the fact that it was said at all tells you something about the level of order that Temujin imposed on a world that had known nothing but chaos. A postal system was created. The Yam, a network of relay stations spaced a day's ride apart, stretching across the entire empire. Riders carrying messages could cover vast distances at extraordinary speed, changing horses at each station, riding day and night. Information flowed from one end of the empire to the other in days rather than weeks. Commands could be issued and obeyed across thousands of miles. This system would later be admired and copied by the Persians, the Russians, the Chinese. It was, in its time, the most sophisticated communication network in the world. Meritocracy was enforced. Promotions were based on ability, not birth. A heir's son who proved himself brave and competent could rise to command a Minghan, 1,000 warriors. A prince who proved himself cowardly or incompetent could be demoted to the lowest rank. There were no exceptions. The rules applied to everyone, including Temujin's own sons, who were expected to earn their positions rather than inherit them. This was the world Temujin built. Not perfect. Not gentle. Not the world we would choose to live in today. But a world that worked. A world that held together. A world that took the fractious, feuding, scattered peoples of the steppe and forged them into something cohesive and purposeful and astonishingly effective. And now it was time to give this world a name. In the year 1206, a great gathering was called. A Kurultai. The assembly of all the Mongol peoples, held on the banks of the Onon River, in the shadow of Burkhan Khaldan, the sacred mountain where Temujin had been born, where he had hidden from the Merkits, where he had prayed to the eternal blue sky in his darkest hours. The location was deliberate. Everything Temujin did was deliberate. He wanted the world to see that the boy who had been born with nothing on these riverbanks, who had starved and suffered and clawed his way up from the very bottom of the steppe's merciless hierarchy, had returned to the place of his beginning as the ruler of everything. The tribes gathered. Thousands upon thousands of people, more than had ever assembled in one place on the Mongolian steppe. Karait and Naiman and Tartar and Merkit and Borjigin and Jadaran and dozens of other clans, all riding under one banner now, all part of one nation, all subject to one law. A great white banner was raised. The tug, the Mongol standard, made of white horsehair taken from the tails of white stallions, mounted on a pole and lifted high into the wind. It caught the breeze and streamed out against the blue sky, and the people watched it, and they knew that something was ending and something was beginning. The shamans spoke. The prayers were offered to the eternal blue sky, to Tengri, the god above all gods, the power that watched over the steppe and its people. The rituals were ancient, older than any tribe, older than any memory, connecting this moment to every moment that had come before, all the way back to the first people who had ridden horses on these grasslands and looked up at the sky and wondered who was looking back. And then the name was spoken. Genghis Khan. The title means, roughly, universal ruler, or oceanic ruler, or ruler whose dominion stretches to the edges of the world, as the ocean stretches to the edges of the land. The exact translation is debated by scholars even now, 9 centuries later, because the word carries resonances that do not translate neatly into other languages. It is a title that contains within it the vastness of the steppe, the endlessness of the sky, the unstoppable force of water flowing downhill. Temujin was no longer Temujin. He was Genghis Khan. And the scattered, feuding, desperate peoples of the Mongolian steppe were no longer tribes. They were a nation. One people. One law. One voice. He was perhaps 44 years old. He had spent roughly 35 of those years fighting to survive. Fighting to eat. Fighting to be free. Fighting to build something that the world had never seen and that the world would never forget. And now, standing on the banks of the river where he had been born, under the mountain that had sheltered him, beneath the sky that had watched him since the moment he came screaming into the world with blood in his fist, he was the most powerful man on the steppe. But the steppe was not enough. It had never been enough. The steppe was the beginning, not the end. Beyond the grasslands lay the great kingdoms of the world. China to the south, with its walled cities and its silk and its emperors who believed they were the center of the universe. The Khwarezmian Empire to the west, with its wealthy trade cities along the Silk Road. Persia. Russia. Europe. Lands that the Mongols had never seen, populated by peoples who had never heard the thunder of Mongol horses. They would hear it soon. But that is a story for another time. Tonight, we end here. At the beginning of the empire. At the moment when a boy became a Khan and a collection of tribes became a nation and the world, without knowing it yet, changed forever. I want you to see him, one last time, before you sleep. Not the conqueror. Not the Khan. Not the legend that would terrify half the world and reshape the map of civilization. I want you to see the man. He stands on the riverbank. The Onon River, the same river where he fished as a starving child, where he learned to set snares for birds, where his mother taught him which roots were safe to eat and which would poison him. The water moves the same way it has always moved, slowly, patiently, catching the light of the evening sun and turning it into gold. He is tall. Lean. His face is weathered by decades of wind and sun. His eyes are pale, green or gray, depending on the light, and they carry in their depths the accumulated weight of everything he has seen and done and survived. The Kang. The killing. The betrayals. The battles. The long, quiet years of rebuilding. The death of Jamukha, his blood brother, his other self. He is surrounded by people. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. An entire nation that exists because he willed it into being. They look at him and they see a Khan. They see power and authority and the promise of a future that is larger than anything they have ever imagined. But I think, in that moment, standing by the river, hearing the water over the stones, he also sees the past. He sees his mother, Holan, standing in an empty camp with her children clustered around her, watching the last of the carts disappear into the grass. He hears her voice. You have no one but each other. You have no friend but your shadow. And he knows, in the deepest part of himself, that everything he has built, the armies, the laws, the nation, the empire that is about to sweep across the world, all of it grew from that moment. From the moment when a woman refused to give up. When a mother chose to fight instead of surrender. When a family with nothing decided that nothing was not enough. Sleep now. Let the river carry you. Let the sound of the water smooth the edges of the day. Let the stars do their slow, ancient work of turning above you, patient and unhurried, as they have turned since before the mountains were young. The story is not over. There are conquests to come, empires to shatter, cities to take, and a legacy that will echo through the centuries until it reaches this fire, this night, this voice whispering to you in the dark. But those are stories for other nights. Tonight, the Khan stands by the river and listens to the water. The white banner snaps in the wind above him. The nation he has built stretches out in every direction, vast and new and full of possibility. And for the first time in his life, perhaps the only time, the boy who was born with nothing allows himself to believe that the worst is over. The fire is low. The steppe is quiet. The river sings its old, old song. And all is well. All is well. All is well.